Better? Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Stikeman Visiting Professor Day. Been a long hiatus since we were able to meet together here like this. In fact, this is the first time we're able to convene for Stikeman Visiting Professor at this cruise amphitheater. This is the Research Institute of the MUHC. Very special day for everyone here. Special day for the staff, for the Division of Cardiac Surgery. Special day for our trainees. This is a chance for us to acknowledge the fine work that our trainees have done and to set them on their paths to their great careers. So it's an opportunity for us to thank them, to recognize them. And it's a chance for us to come together as friends, colleagues, to welcome a visiting professor, which we've done here for 54 years or so. This year's visiting professor has the honor, the distinction, I would say, of being the only visiting professor who appears twice on our list of visiting professors, thanks to something called COVID. So we were able to take advantage of his wisdom last year, simply just for a grand rounds. That's all we could do. And he promised to come back. And he's here. This event today, this lecture and the full program is accredited by the CME section of the Royal College. So I'm actually obliged to disclose a few slides as required by the Royal College. So I'm going to go through these before I introduce our visiting professor. So here's the conflict of interest declaration. As far as myself and Dr. Lorenzo Ferri from thoracic surgery, Kathy Roussis, program organizer and coordinator. And we don't have any significant disclosures to make that are pertinent to today's presentation. We've not received any specific educational grant. This program has not received in-kind support. Mitigation, as far as mitigation of potential bias, the Scientific Planning Committee may ask to remind all Scientific Planning Committee members, presenters, and moderators to complete the conflict of interest form. All must be disclosed to the audience, indicating whether they have any relationships with for-profit or not-for-profit organizations. The speaker to alter the focus of the talk to limit the areas where potential sources of bias is significant. To change the topic, but the same speaker may be used for a peer review of the content to ensure that the principles of scientific integrity, objectivity, and balance have been respected. The overall program learning objectives are to enhance knowledge of cardiac and thoracic academic surgery and to develop better understanding of the basics for common cardiac and thoracic academic surgery. I'd like to acknowledge the organizers of the main organizer of today's program, Ms. Kathy Roussis. Thank you, Kathy. Indeed. I would like to acknowledge the unwavering and dedicated support from the Stikeman family, the close relationship with Dr. Mulder. And we are deeply indebted to the Stikeman family. And this, of course, would not have happened without you. This is an amazing legacy that we have here at McGill. Incidentally, the Stikeman Visiting Professorship is the longest running visiting professorship at McGill in any program. So we're very proud to be privileged to be affiliated with the Stikeman family and to be part of this legacy. As I mentioned, our visiting professor is making a second appearance, I would say, today. Dr. Roselli is the chief of adult cardiac surgery and the director of the Aorta Center and the staff surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic Department of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery. He's on the teaching faculty at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine. He's certified by the American Board of Surgery and the American Board of Thoracic Surgery. He has authored or co-authored over 250 book chapters and articles in peer-reviewed journals on root, arch and thoracoabdominal aortic aneurysms and dissection, endovascular surgery, reoperations, aortic valve surgery, cardiac tumors, atrial fibrillation, and transcatheter device development. Dr. Roselli's research is focused on thoracic aortic dissection and aneurysms and aortic valve and multivalve disease. Specifically, his projects are directed at improving and developing safer and less invasive approaches to treat patients with these problems. He currently serves as the principal investigator and co-investigator for several device trials and holds several patents for novel devices to treat aortic disease. He regularly presents his research at medical and surgical conferences worldwide. Dr. Roselli, thank you very much.
Thanks, Renzo. Thanks, everyone. It's pretty awesome to be here live. I got pretty good at doing virtual visits and virtual lectures, but there's nothing like having a group of people together. And so thank you so much for the invitation to actually be here personally. We had a wonderful dinner last night, conversations fly by when you're having a good meal and good company. And I hope that we can continue that over the next day. I'm looking forward to all the great talks and interactions with everyone here. So as mentioned, I kind of spilled all the beans of everything I know about aorta last year, and to come back again was a bit of a challenge. And so I thought I would share with you this title of the talk, Lessons in Leadership as a Cardiothoracic Surgical Educator, for my Steichman Visiting Professor 2.0. Disclosures are shown here. I am a consultant with several different companies, and I've learned quite a bit from them, and I'll share with you some of that in my talk. There will be some off-label investigational use of devices discussed. So in 2022, the virtual lecture I gave was about the really kind of cutting edge care that we've been delivering in Cleveland in the aortic space, and shared with you a lot of the different things that I've learned and worked on over the years, and shared with you some basic science and translational research we're doing in my engineering lab. I showed you some videos of some complex operations that we use, how we do some of those, and talked about some of the novel devices and technologies we're working on. And this is a summary slide of sort of what that discussion was, and I think sort of encapsulates a lot of my thoughts about how we manage the aorta. Can I turn that thing off? There we go. We have embraced endovascular technology alongside open technology. We're learning more about the natural history of the disease and understanding really the disease process is better. And we need better devices. And as surgeons, people involved taking care of these patients, we got to be the ones involved with developing it. It's worth repeating this. Sorry. There, it's worth repeating that sort of statement again. But my charge from original, Heward Steichman and Al McCall and Dag Monroe, I read the book that you sent me last year. It's a great story, and I think it's just wonderful to know that Mr. Steichman was only with us for 42 years, but made enough of an impression on his family that they've continued a legacy in his name all these years. I mean, the Steichman professorship's gone on longer than Mr. Steichman lived here. And so I think it's a testament to a lot of things and a lot of really important principles. And as I thought about it and read his story and understand, some empathize with what his family had gone through and their loss, I thought about my own father, who I lost about 10 years ago. And my family, it's not the Steichman professorship, but we started a memorial lecture at the Cleveland Clinic in honor of my dad, who had 3 different thoracic cancers. And we've had five surgeons, 5 speakers come so far. My dad immigrated to the United States when he was 13 by himself, and always taught us about the importance of education. And my dad was a storyteller. And before he died, he had time to put together his story. He wrote an autobiography to share with all of us. So we have some legacy with my dad's story. And so I thought, I shared with you a whole bunch of the knowledge that we're working on in the aortic space. I thought today, to be more people oriented and make this a little more personal, I would tell some stories, because storytelling is the oldest form of education. It's a nice way for us to interact personally. So I will update you on some of the newer data that we've gathered over the last year, but I'll be telling you some stories about lessons that I've learned. So like the talking heads say, you go through your days one day at a time, and we have to live in the moment to be cardiothoracic surgeons, because sometimes blood is shooting over your shoulder, right? Or you have to open a chest in the middle of the night, like they did at the bedside, which happens sometimes. And moments like this are nice because you get to step back and reflect on how you got here. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about some things that I've learned along the way. And if I could just distill it down or cut it all out and focus on one thing, I think the most important thing is right here in this slide. And it's important for us every single day when we make decisions, is that we should never, ever forget why it is that we got here as we reflect on sort of how we got here. The reason why we got here is because we chose to do something that's really special. And so when we're making decisions, we should always remember that there's this hierarchical order of good. There's a whole bunch of different influences that come into play when you make decisions. But the thing that stands at the top is our patients. That's the altruism that brought us through all that difficult medical school training and residency and everything else. And that sort of keeps us going when we get calls in the middle of the night. We have our own personal desires as caregivers. We want job satisfaction, autonomy, and quality of life, but that should never be higher than this sort of second order of good. And so as you go through your career, always keep this sort of pyramid of hierarchy about your decision-making in mind, and it'll serve you well. It'll carry you through, I think, success in your career in a lot of different ways. And the institution is sort of the biggest block in that pyramid, but it'll be there. It'll be there when you're gone. But the way that you interact with your patients is the thing that will allow you to sort of, when you do reflect, know that you lived a good life. This is who we are, cardiovascular surgeons. We're the patient's last resort. We always will be, always have been. And I like this quote from Bruce Lytle. It says that the characteristic that has most distinguished our specialty has been the type of people that have chosen to go into the field. I like to sort of share with my colleagues sometimes we're all a little bit crazy to do what we do because the stress never goes away. And you have friends that say to you, wow, isn't your job stressful? And you just say, yeah, you can't explain it to anybody else, but everybody in this room gets it. And we should never forget it. It's okay. It's good. It's kind of, when it's hard, you got to kind of say, well, I chose this. And when it's good, you have to kind of embrace it and enjoy it. But we have to adapt too, because the field is changing in so many different ways. We have to be on the front end as well. And so when I started out, as I finished my training in the fall of 2004, which was my last year, Toby Cosgrove had just moved to the CEO position, and Bruce Lytle took over as the chairman. And I was up all night on call. We didn't have any work hour requirements back then, and I got a phone call that Dr. Lytle wanted to see me in his office, and I thought, oh no, what did I do last night? Did I screw something up? Did I kill somebody last night? And I came to his office and he sat me down and he started talking about how he needs an aortic surgeon in the group. And he said, I know that you've been focused on learning heart failure, because at the time I thought maybe I was going to be a heart failure specialist. And he says, so don't say anything. I need an aortic surgeon. I said, no, wait, this is good. Are you offering me a job? And he said, yeah. I said, well, then I love aortic surgery. And it was an area that I've always been interested in too, because everything we do is interesting. But I talked to him about how I thought at the time with the development of catheter-based technologies that I needed to get some additional training. And he said, that's exactly what I had in mind. Things fall together and the timing is special. And so, Norman Shumway says the hardest thing about cardiac surgery is getting a chance to do it. Well, I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I had a chance to do it. And and to get this hybrid training. So I had the opportunity to be really one of the first guys to become a hybrid trained cardiac surgeon, because there was no vascular surgery chairman at the time. And Roy Greenberg was doing a whole bunch of developing a lot of novel technology in the vascular surgical space. And he was a friend of mine from my general surgery training. And so I had this opportunity to sort of that first year on staff to figure out how to become a hybrid surgeon. And I thought, okay, well, this is great. I'm at the Cleveland Clinic. The founders of this institution founded this place on this principle of collaboration. This is their mission statement. And in 1921, when these gentlemen came back from World War I, after having all these sort of fireside chats with each other about what medicine should look like, they said, we're going to create a model where we share. We're all salaried, and we're all going to share whatever revenue we generate from the work we do. That was kind of crazy back then. So they were, because it was definitely pay for service in 1921. And they were accused of being communists in 1921 back in Cleveland. But that model has proven well and has allowed collaboration to sort of stay at the top of the sort of principles of important things. And so I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to come in and just have everybody in all these other specialties teach me how to be a hybrid guy. And it worked out, but it wasn't so easy, right? So people are still people, and I got all different kinds of reactions. Like when I showed up in a interventional suite or a cath lab or in a vascular hybrid OR, I got, what are you doing here? My inner monologue was, uh-oh, should I be here? And I had to sort of, step back and think about patients. And I turned it back to patients and said, well, I want to learn how we can take care of patients better. And somehow that sort of softened things. And then, of course, I had some really great mentors in those spaces who welcomed me. Pat Whitlow was a really amazing cardiovascular interventionalist, one of the first guys to do PCI. And, and he said, what do you want to learn? He was really great. And I thought, oh, this is cool. Everything. In fact, he gave me my first case, the first cabbage, and it was a long-standing patient of his, and he put it, trusted me. It was hard to come from a trainee that stays at your institution because they still see you as a resident. And then I'd go into a vascular surgery room, and there was, this one surgeon who, every time I asked a question, the response was, well, Eric, and I thought, oh gosh, I just asked the question. And I'd be like, well, so-and-so, thanks for the answer. And, but I had to stay cool, because I was in his domain. And so inner monologue was like, uh-oh, how do I navigate this? And then, I'd go in a cath lab and I'd put a catheter in the right coronary artery, and I'd say, oh, you're pretty good at this. And in my head, I'd be like, cool, all right, this is great. But it's not heart surgery, it's not that hard. But I couldn't say that to the interventional cardiologist. And then I remember one of the first meetings I was at, and I ran into an old colleague, and he says, oh, you really want to be a wire jockey? And I thought, oh, that's kind of a weird thing to sort of say to somebody, and I thought, well, he just doesn't get it. And so, as I was going through these processes, I also thought back about another mentor that I had. This guy, Caldwell Esselstyn, was a general surgery staff guy, really neat guy, won an Olympic gold medal in the 50s. And we were at the scrub sink when I was like a second year, and we called him Essie. He guy was 70 and these guns because he was like an Olympic athlete, and we're scrubbing at the scrub sink. He said, where's Ellie? He said, success, what success is about? And, no, Essie, I'm washing my hands. And he says, it's about timing and style. And I just kind of nodded my head and I said, yeah, okay, Essie. And I had no idea what he was talking about. But it stuck with me. And this was one of those, times when I thought about, all right, the timing's good. I know I'm in the right place at the right time. I got to make sure my style fits to handle all these different sort of reactions that I'm getting from people. And so those words sort of were helpful. And I had a friend who's a CEO. He's a CEO, a serial CEO. He's a young guy, a really great guy. And he gave me this book a long time ago. That was, it's a pretty quick little pop philosophy thing. But it's good. It talks about these 4 agreements. And I think, 1, 3, and 4 are very easy. You have to be impeccable with your word and don't make assumptions and always do your best if you're going to get through residency. Those are the easy things to do. And this part about not taking anything personally sort of stuck home with me when I was going through this process. And I thought, all right, well, you know, the guy that's attacking me and always like sort of yells my name at me when I ask a question, there's something like that's not me, that's him. And I had to remind myself with my style to sort of just hang in there. And that's not easy for an Italian guy. You know, there's a lot of times when I'd get pretty fired up and I realized that Bruce Lytle was smart to put my office way at the end of the hallway, because I'd come marching down the hallway pretty fired up about something. By the time I got to the end of the hallway and took a few deep breaths, I turned around and went back, because you have to choose your battles. But I thought I'd share with you this one story also that I really sort of hit this home. I got this story is called The Little Chair. So I told you I got this training at a time when there wasn't a vascular surgery chair. Well, they had one, and the guy was a total disaster, and he got fired within a short period of time. So again, the timing is right. I was just hanging out with Roy Greenberg, learning everything that I could, and then the new chairman was named. He was having a tough time, I think, because thought he was going to get the job initially, and then the guy that was a disaster came. Anyway, he calls me to his office, and he sits me down in a chair that belonged to the guy that didn't last very long, and it was a real low chair. So like he points to this chair that he wants me to sit in, that chair, which would never be the chair I would choose. I felt like this guy, you know, I'm like sitting in this awkward little chair while he calls me to his office to have this conversation, and he continues to go on and talk about how my role as a hybrid guy that's doing some endovascular aortic surgery made them feel like I was shoved down their throats. He said this to me, and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, then I started feeling kind of like this guy, you know, like, I can't get up and like leave. I can't say anything bad to this gentleman. And I, again, thought about that sort of pyramid good. And I thought, all right. And I told him, I says, look, I'm just here to do the best I can for patients. And I had to explain to this, it was awkward because he was a senior guy who I had as a trainee when I was a general surgery resident. And I had to explain to them that I was just here to work with him and make our patients better. We have different referral patterns, how we can lift each other up. And I walked out of there and I was just I was glad I was able to stand up out of that little chair. And then I went over to Bruce Lytle. And I told him about the conversation and how it went down. And he's always been a great mentor to me. He lifted me up and he said, Eric, that's fine. You handled that just great. And he said, and then he told me a little bit about the details of the guy that sort of put me in the chair and tried to belittle me there, and talked about some of the issues that guy had. And then we made it sort of like a good experience and open my eyes. So you have to look at other people's perspectives. You know, we're good at empathizing with our patients, but we have to empathize with our colleagues as well. And that was a really important lesson that Bruce taught me. And so I was able to sort of slug through all that training. And eventually, as the practice grew and we got busier, I had to build my practice. And I'm surrounded by all these really great surgeons that had, you know, focused niches. And, you know, Gustav Pedersen is doing all this complex adult congenital and endocarditis, and Nick Smedera's got his myectomy practice, and Mark Gilnoff took over Toby Cosgrove's mitral surgery, and Lars Svensson. He's just a giant of surgery, and so I had to find my niche. Well, my niche ended up taking care of all these things that nobody wanted. I kept flying into the Cleveland Clinic, a lot of these complex redo thoracic aorta cases, and that's okay. I was happy to embrace that. I was trained to do that, and it was tough though. There was a lot of challenges along the way on the clinical side of things. But, you know, we measure our outcomes. Floyd Loop started doing this, and the database has over 160,000 patients at the Cleveland Clinic going back to 1971 or 1968 or something like that. And Toby Cosgrove sort of really reinforced this and expanded this, not only measuring our outcomes, but sharing them. As many of you may know, something important that we do. And he was the 1991 Steichman professor, of course, and a mentor of mine. And the 2008 Steichman professor, Eugene Blackstone, still comes to work every morning right on time at 7 a.m. and continues to innovate in how we analyze these numbers and look at these things. Well, my numbers weren't so good because I was taking care of some really complex aorta stuff that nobody else wanted to take care of, and we couldn't transfer them anywhere else. And so that was tough, but we learned. And one of the things that I learned was that you gotta You got to not give up. Toby Cosgrove, this is a quote from him. This guts quotient is something he talked about, how your guts quotient is more important than your IQ. You know, it is a lesson his father taught him. And we used to have these Saturday morning breakfasts with Toby. And so, you know, I was taught to sort of just slug it out and keep focusing on getting better and managing some of these complex problems better. And that gave me a goal and a challenge to handle. And Nick Madeira, who is another one of my mentors, had given me this book early on and shared it with a bunch of us. And I like this way of thinking from the Navy SEALs about taking extreme ownership and total responsibility for what you do. Not only the success, but of course, total responsibility for the failure. It's a difficult thing to accept, but it requires extraordinary humility and courage. And I like to think about the Navy SEALs because I always talk about how we're the special forces of medicine. Nobody's trained like cardiothoracic surgeons are. And that's more apparent than ever. Certainly, that experience gave me a lot of humility. There's nothing like clinical challenge to sort of keep you humble, even when things you think have gone perfectly well. Sometimes patients don't do well. But the courage came from my colleagues, and I have really great colleagues all around me, and people supported me across the way. And so I think it's important to appreciate that. But not only do I have really great surgical colleagues, but over those first several years, and it continues now into my 18th year as a staff guy, I've created great partnerships with the colleagues I work in the operating room, in my administrator in my office, my nurse practitioners in the outpatient clinic. Here's a picture. I took them out to dinner a couple of days ago, or a couple of weeks ago, and I met this 4-star general, Kevin Chilton, and he talked about the teamwork that he built in the as a 4-star general in the Air Force, and also as an astronaut. And he talked about how these partnerships are built on trust. And so I've got a team of people that I've worked with now many years, some of them with the entirety of my career. And we built these partnerships on trust. We affectionately call ourselves Club 73. 73 is my operating room. And we're Club 73 because we're often working really late, and we turn the music up, and we make sure that we have fun when we're there working hard together. And every year they give me some gift, and I give them some gift. You know, they're wearing these little hoodies that had the Club 73 patch on it, and they, you know, this team sign sits above my door in my office. And so, you know, we always take time to remind each other of how what we do is so important. In fact, when we do a huddle, when a patient comes in, we do a safety huddle in my room. It takes an extra minute or so, but I make sure that when we do that huddle, we not only talk about the antibiotics that we're giving and what kind of cardioplegia we're going to give and the important details of how we're going to cannulate a patient, but I have everyone in the room go around and introduce themselves to the patient. And sometimes, you know, someone mumbles because they already introduced themselves to the patient. I tell them, no, you're not only introducing yourself to the patient, you're introducing yourself to all of us. Because I don't always have every member of my team in that room. I often have a trainee or an orientee, and it's a time for us. And I say it out loud. I said, this is a time for us to make sure that everybody knows they have a voice in here, because we do have to be a team to get these great outcomes that we have. And we have to focus on that and not forget that. And that's been something that's been real special, is to build these sort of relationships built on that kind of trust. That's another special thing that we do. And I think it was awesome when I sat back and sort of reflected on what those probably first 10 years or so of my career have been like. And I thought those were all very important lessons that continue to this day. But I also remember that there were some other challenges I didn't really expect. My dad would make all of his grandkids take a Dale Carnegie course because as a businessman, it taught him to learn how to sort of speak publicly. Well, that was one of my greatest fears, was public speaking. I'm good in a small group, but my first year, because I'm the first sort of hybrid trained guy, which I felt like I didn't really know a whole lot. I was still learning. I was asked to give 22 lectures that first year, including 4 international ones. And I was put on a stage, and I dreaded it. My heart would race at 140 beats a minute, and I'd get sweaty. And sometimes I'd have like a GI emergency, you know, it was horrible. But I just kept facing that fear and pushing through it. And early on, I also, as a doctor, prescribed myself about 100 milligrams of propranolol PRN, which really helped quite a bit. I still would get a little tachycardic, but it'd be like 110 instead of 140. I don't use propranolol anymore. I got over that. But you got to conquer your fears and face things, and we can all learn anything that we need to learn. And it's been a great experience. We've built this aortic program. We now are doing over 1,400 aortic operations a year. In 2022, we did over 900 thoracic aortic operations, and they're complex. It's over 500 routes. About 120 of those are David's procedures. Over 130 of them are total arch replacements. And really, what I'm proud of is how great our team has continued to maintain this awesome quality. We're measuring those outcomes, but they have gotten really a whole lot better, even though we're doing a lot more complex stuff. Our observed to expected ratio is considerably low all the time. Less than 1% is pretty awesome. And then as I moved through my career, I was then asked to take on some leadership roles. And I like this quote from Floyd Luke that it's not a still life. You have to be proactive. I read some stuff from him, and he talked about how he went from being this clinician and was kind of forced into the role as the CEO of a Cleveland clinic when it was in financial trouble, and how he had to learn business, and there was a lot of changes that he had to make. But we're used to kind of making changes and moving quickly and making fast decisions in what we do. But you got to be careful as you work with different people and relationships, like I talked about in sort of chapter 1 of this talk. But I was asked to take on some leadership roles. And again, the timing was good because we had this organizational realignment in Cleveland in 2005, where we switched from sort of this silo sort of designation of medicine and surgery to this more radical sort of disease and organ-based institutes model, where the Heart, Vascular, and Thoracic Institute is comprised of cardiothoracic surgery, cardiology, and vascular surgery, all under one umbrella with one leader. And fortunately, the leader has been a cardiac surgeon every time since then. We've had 3 of those. Toby Cosgrove put this change in place and talked about how this institute model is designed around the convenience of patients and families. And so again, I bring it back to this thought about that pyramid of hierarchical good. Our patients are at the top. And then as Lars Svensson became the HVTI lead, he asked me to take over as the director of the Aorta Center. And that was good. It was interesting. I had some ideas about how we were working as an aorta team and how we could change. And I realized there were some things that were getting a little stale, and trying to get some buy-in from other disciplines to sort of participate. I don't know, maybe it's just not my leadership style, or maybe it's just the way things should work in general. But I realized that it wasn't going to work just me being the head of the Aorta Center. It needs to be more than sort of a one person at the top model. And so one of the first moves I made was changed my title from the Aorta Center leader, just the cardiac surgery director. And I asked one of my colleagues from cardiology, that's Milind Desai, to be the medical director of the Aorta Center. And originally it was Sean Lydon, who's the chairman of the Department of Vascular Surgery, but now Frank Caputo, to be the vascular surgery director. With this shared leadership model, we have more open communication, early conflict resolution, consensus building is easy. We're able to share some resources, and we make sure that we always share credit for things. And getting things done and moving things in this sort of, proactive way that Floyd Luke talks about is way easier when we have this shared leadership model. And it's gone far. And then after about a year or so, then Lars says, well, we need to further develop our disease condition centers. So, this institute model, we've got these institutes, but then within the institutes, we have areas of focus that are focused on patients' issues. We had a heart failure center forever. We had several of these sort of focused centers that are focused on conditions. And Toby Cosgrove, when he wrote this book, there's a little bit in there where I was interviewed for part of it, because apparently I learned how to collaborate as the hybrid guy. And so Lars knew this. Said, Eric, I want you to sort of, with your skills of collaboration, I want you to sort of help us develop our disease condition centers. And I thought, oh man, okay. I wasn't really too excited about that challenge, but I had some things to learn. And so I thought about, again, this idea that it's patients that can bring us together. And this condition center is about focusing on patients. patients don't know what we are. I mean, how many times have you been called introduced as a cardiologist when you're a cardiac surgeon? People don't know. That's okay. What they know, though, is the diagnosis they've been given, right? And so these condition centers are focused on the patients and their conditions, but we want to build the team around them. And I thought, well, what do people want? They want some mastery. There's people that really focus on specific diseases and their interests. People want some autonomy and some purpose, so we can make people sort of the head of a center and give them something to sort of really hone in on and focus. And so, these interdisciplinary, small condition center teams that are patient centric are a really nice model to sort of build these things for our caregivers and give people professional growth. And again, it's a pretty awesome privilege, that we're part of this humanism that we're part of has no equal, as Floyd Luke says. And so I honed in on kind of those ideas when I started thinking about this. But so I came to the executive council, and I drew this sort of map of the chest and thought, all right, well, we're not going to have physical centers that people kind of walk into. It's just not practical. We're going to have some sort of virtual thing. And so I thought about how we could have someone navigate through all these different condition centers. We had about 20 some centers when it first sort of started, and they were all over this map of the chest, focused on a lot of different things. We envisioned something where you could kind of come to a page and you could click on your diagnosis and it would lead you to people that specialize in this thing. And I thought, well, we've got to create sort of a process for people if they want to build a new center. Someone wants to kind of focus on something. And I learned from another Steichman professor, Pat McCarthy, that you have to, when you want to learn something new, you have to listen. You have to learn from everyone, and you have to observe really closely. When I was a general surgery resident, I was first coming up, Pat was really great to me, helped me sort of get into the cardiac surgery fellowship. And I was really fortunate. Again, the timing was right. The fellows were all graduating, and Pat McCarthy had just gone down to Wash U to learn how to do the Cox-Maze procedure with Dr. Cox. And at the Cleveland Clinic, you can do a lot of something pretty quick. I mean, he was doing Maze procedures like every day, and the fellows, I don't know, they weren't that interested in scrubbing with them. So I got to scrub with Pat McCarthy as the first assist as a general surgery resident. And in a couple of months, I must have first assisted on 25 Maze procedures. It was really cool. And again, he was really good to me about teaching me all this stuff. And then I remember right after that, I was interviewing for cardiac surgery residency. I went down to Wash U, and I was interviewing with Dr. Cox and Ralph Damiano, and I told him how I had this great experience. I got to do all these Cox-Maze procedures with Pat McCarthy, and they said, Pat McCarthy was an amazing guy when he came down here. I remember when he came to observe. We've had a lot of people come and observe this, but nobody was like Pat, where he stuck his head almost in the way to observe, and had notes and took copious notes, and he asked all these questions about all these little details. They talked about his ability to sort of listen really well and observe really closely. And that story they told me about him sort of stuck with me. And I thought, that's what I need to do to figure out these condition centers things. So I visited all the teams that have had these centers for a while and realized that there were some focal areas that we share. And I came up with this sort of model so that and we have a template. So if a young staff in either cardiology or cardiac surgery, or someone wants to create a new center, they come to us and we have this method for them to sort of build a center. And we use this mnemonic called players. First thing you have to focus on is the population of patients you want to treat. You have to define it very precisely, and sometimes that's not as easy as you would think. You have to decide who are the leaders of this center, and again, that's not so easy because, as I told you, what we did with the Aorta Center, it's best if it's multidisciplinary. You're going to get buy-in from everybody. We need to have some clearly defined access for those patients. They have to have a number to call, or a process where when they get called, there's a trigger for how to schedule things. And you have to measure your outcomes. You have to measure some yearly metrics. It doesn't necessarily matter what that metric is, depending on what your goals are, but you got to measure something so you know if you're having success and achieving some of the goals that you set for yourself. The nice thing about this is you have to educate, and it's a nice way to sort of bring teams together. Education is an important part, as is research. And we've created some educational processes that sort of facilitate all of this. And then, of course, another way with regards to clinical care that the teams come together is they often can put together strategies and standardized care paths and protocols to take care of these patients. And these are the things that are shared by all these condition centers, and it's worked well. So we took these sort of centers, these condition centers, and they've grown. So in 2015, there was 27 of them. Now that's a misprint. It's not 58, it's actually 48. So we almost doubled the number of centers that we have. And then we realized we had so many of them, we organized them into these umbrellas. So we have sort of a couple of different leadership roles, and we allow everybody sort of some autonomy to sort of explore these areas that they're interested in. And it's worked sort of beautifully. It helps us to give younger people that a career path to focus on. And we realize that, again, a nice way to really kick it off, to introduce something, is to create an education and research mechanism for people to share. And so we had these aorta conferences on Wednesdays when I first took over as the aorta head, and they got stale. You know, it'd be 1 week it would be the cardiac guy showed up, and 1 week the vascular guys would show up, and it just wasn't that great. And we have grand round speakers, and some are great and some are not. You know, after a long talk, people start to look at their phones or lose interest, and I hope I still got everybody's interest. But we realized that, you know, coming together, again, focusing on patients, we could create a different model. And so I came up with this idea and called this, instead of grand rounds, I called it tall rounds. So those of you who are coffee, you know, drinkers, you know, the Starbucks tall coffee is still pretty big coffee, but it's not quite a grande, you know. So we wanted this tall rounds idea, and there's a format for this. So we have a case presentation, and we make sure we get a trainee up on the podium to present. And then we have several speakers that will speak for, you know, maybe 6 or 7 minutes each, all from different disciplines around the same thing. And it's been a really wonderful thing. And all of a sudden we have standing room only, 125 people in the room for these conferences, a couple times a month. And it grew, and we started to provide CME internally for it. And then we realized that, you know, we could standardize a bunch of this, and we built this program. Our alumni were interested in joining online virtually. And then when the pandemic hit, we already had this process in place where we started sharing the website in 2018 and sharing some CME. You can see when the pandemic hit and we launched the CME online, free for anybody that gets online to join us for these multidisciplinary conferences, the subscribers to Tall Rounds took off. It was 5,000 in September of 2020 in a really short period of time. And now there's over 15,000 people that subscribe to these. We just ask that you give us your email, and you can join us for our postgraduate education. And it's been a really nice way to share. And we make sure that centers are represented. So when we want to like put our curriculum together for these, say, hey, this center hasn't put a program together, it gets everybody together. And then I was asked to be the chief of adult cardiac surgery. So I have a few of these different leadership roles, and that's kind of real focused on our team. A lot of operating room efficiency stuff. We're focused on some cost saving projects right now, which has not been super easy to sort of to address, because I feel like we run pretty lean already. But you know, with some of these sort of principles that you see listed here about, you know, delegating authority and sharing recognition, you know, we're able to move the needle on a lot of these sort of things. And so those have been important things that
is there really any
important things that I learned about leadership in this sort of chapter 2 of sort of my career. And then I thought maybe we could just use a little intermission, little comic relief. I'm going to share a little video with you. I just think it's really funny.
And is there really any way, deep down, that Trump has actually read this thing, given that he recently said this?
We have come up with a solution that's really, really, I think, very good. Now, I have to tell you, it's an unbelievably complex subject. Nobody knew that healthcare could be so complicated.
Everybody knew that. Everybody knew healthcare is complicated. Literally everybody. It is the one thing people know about healthcare. It's complicated.
So I don't want to be political. I mean, healthcare is complicated. And I just talked to you about a lot of complicated things that I learned sort of in a short period of time. And but what's complicated is taking care of patients every day. And now I'd like to sort of update a little bit of what we've been doing sort of with regards to innovation that we have. And I know I went through a lot of things last year. But this has been a really special part of my career, and it's been part of it sort of all along. The invitation to be the hybrid guy meant I got to do something new all the time and explore new areas. And that was really exciting. And, I'll call this the innovation imperative. That was Toby Cosgrove's the title of his AATS lecture when he was the president. And I've got quotes from a couple other my good friends, the Joes, the aortic surgery guys, Joe Bavaria and Joe Caselli are good friends of mine. Joe Bavaria, of course, was the 2010 Steichman professor. And in his presidential address, he talked about how liberated surgeons can be ingenious and how we have to strike this balance between innovation and other biases to sort of be careful and all the regulatory process we have in place. And Joe Caselli made this statement at this recent AATS on a panel. If we're supposed to learn from things that didn't work out, we're certainly very learned. What a humble statement from a guy who's done over 3,000 thoracoabdominals, and that's what he was referring to. But then he went on to say how, what we're doing is really awesome and the future's bright for what we do. But I thought I'd sort of kick off with a couple of quotes from those guys, my friends. And again, Tom Edison, who's an Ohioan, sort of talked about finding a better way to do it, and it is ingrained in the culture in Cleveland Clinic. This is Mason Sones and Renee Favillaro, who really instrumental in building cardiovascular surgery in the late 60s with the discovery of cardiac catheterization there, and Favillaro's insight to sort of proactively treat coronary artery disease. Bruce Lytle talks about how the timing was also right because at the time Medicare just came in place, so there was a way to pay for all of this, and it's great because I think we can all innovate. This is a book that I recommend to any of you. It's very interesting. It's written by this guy Kevin Ashton, who was the inventor of sort of the Internet of Things. So he created RFID and stuff, and he talks about how our species, we are Homo sapiens sapiens, the next sort of species after Homo sapiens. And the way that we're defined is not by our brow ridge or some structural anatomic thing, but about 150,000 years ago, they noticed that a different sort of humanoid was in place because we started to find different solutions for the same problem. So we are defined as Homo sapiens sapiens by the fact that we innovate. We can all innovate. It's a complex process, but it can be done. And I learned to innovate from this guy, Roy Greenberg, who's no longer with us, but was really an amazing mentor to me. Roy taught me a lot of lessons. First, I think he just brought me along because he wanted a heart surgeon to sort of back him up when he was doing some crazy stuff. But I think it was more than that. And again, reflecting on Roy, who also died about 10 years ago, he was sick around the same time as my dad was. Roy was really an amazing guy that built a whole lot of really neat things, and to this day has influenced a lot of active innovators and operators. And what he focused on was creating better endovascular devices. So first he started, creating fenestrations in some of these abdominal stent grafts, and then he added covered stents to them. And then he designed devices with directional branches, and eventually created these thoracoabdominal stent graft devices that has a bunch of patents on these. And the Cook Company still, has a bunch of programs in place that were originally Roy's ideas. And Roy was really good to me. In fact, gave me the opportunity to present his initial data from his physician-sponsored IDE on branch thoracoabdominal stent grafts. It was my first presentation at the AATS. It was on the cover of this journal, something I was really proud of. He also put me on the firing squad in front of this guy, another Steichman professor, Craig Miller, who grilled me pretty hard when I was up there. But I created a friendship with Dr. Miller, and that was a really important time for me. Roy taught me that when you innovate, you need to start, again, with your patients looking at unmet needs. That's where we need to expand and grow. You need to make iterative improvements. You see how he kind of went stepwise in these sort of images on the slide. And we always have to think about doing it safely. We want to be able to rescue our patients when we get in trouble. Like I said, that's part of the reason why he brought me along. But Roy was a really great guy that thought big. And this is a quote from him, before he passed away. He had 2 young boys. He talked about how he wanted them to know the world is a small place and there's friends everywhere we go. And we got to appreciate the friendships that we strengthened last night at dinner and during this stay. I'm looking forward to this. One of the lessons he taught me is don't let others define you. So he said we shouldn't focus on being a vascular surgeon or interventional radiologist or cardiologist. We should focus on our patients and the diseases we treat. And Roy did that. He went out and went to Malmo, Switzerland, and did an interventional radiology fellowship to learn how to do endovascular stuff after his vascular surgery training. I thought that was amazing. He said, learn from everywhere, and not just from other operators, other medical personnel, but industry and regulatory bodies also have a lot to teach us. So Roy introduced me to all these engineers from these different companies. And when I learned how an engineer looks at the way the diseases we treat are looked at from an engineering standpoint, I think differently about the way I take care of my patients. I think about durability, and those have been really important lessons, not only in device development, but really in patient care. And the regulatory process also, requires you to have sort of some business sense and kind of know whether something that you dream up is going to become real or not, because you don't want to waste your time. And he was a mentor to me because he challenged me to think in different ways and pushed me down different pathways. And so real grateful for Roy. And I think, again, he brought me on to help him with the thoracoabdominal branch stuff. And I did a whole bunch of those with him, but I wasn't going to do that stuff all day. I'm a heart surgeon. And so I took what I learned from Roy, and we sort of expanded a lot of those lessons into the space in the aortic arch. And if you guys heard me speak, recently, it was the Aortic Consortium, and that was here in Montreal. And last year, we talked about how we developed this technique for a frozen elephant trunk using off-label use of devices, what we call the branch stented anastomosis frozen elephant trunk repair. But what you don't know is the story. So the story where I first started thinking about doing this was right in the beginning when Roy and I were working together. He had this lady with a type B dissection with persistent pain and a poor landing zone. And he enrolled her in this physician-sponsored IDE that he had. He did a carotid subclavian bypass, and he designed a device that has a fenestration built into it. He thought this was going to be an off-the-table, off-the-shelf sort of device for these difficult landing zones with a big fenestration to sit under the arch vessels. So we put this thing in. It went great. We put a little stent in the left carotid because it was close to where the fenestration was. The patient did well. And then on post-op day 2, she had pain. We got a CAT scan. It was a retrograde dissection. So I took this patient to the OR. This was, again, I told you, like, I started out with complex stuff. I was like, holy cow. So I got to take this patient in. But it went beautifully. And we did this open repair. And I realized that I could sew to the stent graft to salvage this thing. And that's when the light bulb went off and said, oh, we can put the stent grafts in. We can put them in antegrade and we can sew them in. Before that, both Roy and Bruce Lytle tried to get together to do a frozen elephant trunk, and it went horribly because neither one of them sort of knew what the other guy was doing. And I realized I had this special opportunity. And I just saw this lady actually a month ago, 18 years after. This is a CT scan. That thing is still in place, where you can see it's kind of a suture line where we sewed in a stent graft, and there's still a stent sticking up in her left carotid. I didn't take anything out. I just incorporated it into an open repair. And I mentioned, again, 2003 psych professor Craig Miller. The friendship we struck up at that meeting when he grilled me about the thoracoabdominal thing stayed. He came as a visiting professor, and he said, Eric, you should write this up, these antegrade delivery of stent graft things that you're doing. And so one of my early publications came from a challenge from Dr. Miller. And he would send me these emails sometimes in the middle of the night saying, Eric, you got to write about your use of these frozen elephant trunks. So for some 15 years, I kept telling him I will, but I can't, right away, or I'm going to get in trouble with the FDA. But an update from last year is we finally did sort of study our outcomes with a bunch of these that we were doing in this off-label procedures. And I presented at this European meeting, and it's now published in the European Journal of Cardiothoracic Surgery in 2023. You can see for the longest time, we were doing limited repairs for acute dissections. We compared limited versus extended repairs. And you can see over the last several years, the frozen elephant trunks have become a predominant way that we treat these. Of these 879 patients, we were able to do a propensity matched analysis. We matched of 90 of these frozen elephant trunks, we were able to match 80 of them to the extended classic repairs. We were able to match 83 of them to limited repairs. and then a smaller match set between the extended classics and the frozen elephant trunks. And what we found, first of all, that was surprising, was that the reinterventions were actually higher in the frozen elephant trunks. But it's because the reinterventions were facilitated. We were able to do endovascular interventions. So the people that had their disease progress fast, we took them to the OR and we fixed them with a stent graft. It was easy. It was done quickly. And it translated all of this care into better survival because we didn't take any risk up front by extending those repairs with this frozen elephant trunk technique. And we were able to kind of manage those patients. And you see the survival curves separate at around 3 or 4 years. So we also found that we reduced the renal dysfunction in these patients. And we think as we follow them out further, there will be more long-term survival benefit. We also then created this physician-sponsored IDE, again, which I modeled from what I learned from Roy Greenberg after I got this letter from the FDA. And there were a whole bunch of big titles on this letter from the FDA. So I pulled together my team, the Cleveland Clinic. You know, when you're under fire, you fly in formation. So I grabbed a bunch of lawyers from the Cleveland Clinic and we sat around the table on this conference call with the FDA. And I introduced all the people with big titles from the Cleveland Clinic who I didn't even know half of them, but they were there at the table with me. And then I focused on the patients and told the FDA, look, our patients really need something. We have a better solution for this. We're going to study it like you asked us to. So we put together this PSIDE, and I just presented this at the AATS. And again, I had talked about this a little last year. This is sort of the model of how this study is constructed. All different variations of this Be Safer technique are included in the study. In 18 months, we have 178 of these total arch replacements that we enrolled. 73 of them are acute dissections, 68 of them are chronic dissections, and 33 of them are degenerative aneurysms. And this is what the patient population looks like, mostly male, except for the degenerative aneurysms are mostly female. Something I'm proud of is it is all inclusive. You can see the population around Cleveland. There's a lot of African Americans. You see the acute dissections are 30% African American in this cohort. They do have significant comorbidities like COPD, a high history of stroke, and many of them were reoperations. And most of these were done with this Gore device, some relay devices. About a third of them had the root replaced. And there was a couple of sizes that we typically use, and we tried to keep the stent graft short when we do these procedures. We do antegrade brain perfusion in all of the patients. A lot of them were cannulated via the axilla, and we tend to go with sort of a moderate hypothermia when we do these. And you can see the iteration or the configuration of the reconstruction sort of correlated with the amount of sort of rest time. It's faster for this single anastomosis, single stent sort of configuration. But our outcomes are great. The mortality is less than 6%. Disabling stroke is less than 3%. And in the chronic dissection patients, those outcomes are even better. And you can see that that trickles down into a survival advantage as well. And as we gather more data, we'll learn more about the details about how we do this. But in parallel, we've been developing a device, and now we have this device. Real challenge. We now have an industry partner, and Tivion has helped us to create this device, the Neo LSA, which should be launched next year as a multi-center trial. And hopefully, what we've learned in Cleveland will be able to allow us to democratize the great outcomes we have with total arch replacement. That's one area of innovation, and I think we've learned a lot from that. But we also have developed ascending stent grafting as a novel technology in Cleveland. Again, we started with an unmet need. We did the best we could with some off-label use of devices. We learned a lot of lessons. We partnered with Gore to create this ASG device, published the first in human studies, and we learned a lot of lessons along the way. Like we need to make sure that these pseudoaneurysms aren't infected. This was the first patient I did with Roy in 2006. We learned that when we put these devices in, we got to be really accurate. This is a patient where we deployed it and it covered her left main coronary artery. We converted to open surgery. We were able to sort of pull the device out of there, but the reason we did this ascending stent graft in the first place, because we thought she was high risk, and the patient had a lot of complications and died later of those complications. We realized that we needed a better way to reposition these devices if they're malposed. And then a few months later, we had another one. And while we deployed this thing and it sort of covered the left main coronary artery again, we were getting the pump up on the field. I remembered the lady that we lost, and came up with this idea to put a balloon in the stent graft. And so this is what we did. We deployed this balloon while we were rapid pacing. We pulled back on the balloon and then stopped the pacing, and we were able to drag this thing off of the left main. It opened up again. As you can see, the device is not really positioned the way we want it to. So this coaxiality is crucial for success, and that drove the innovation with the team from Gore. And then we learned other things as well, like this patient who had a really complex endocarditis and had this pseudoaneurysm. We put this device in, not just the coronaries, but it could be the valve that gets compromised. And after we put this device in, this patient had AI. We pulled the device back. We realized we needed to be better about understanding how the valve works. And then this patient, we put a device in. We treated this ruptured dissection, and then the patient exsanguinated from a hole in the PA. And this was really hard because, you know, we did this transapically, and I thought we had this really great sort of approach to this high risk patient. And then we lost him, and I talked to his wife about it, and she was grateful for us trying. And then I realized that we had to understand the imaging details a little bit better. And then this guy shows up, 38-year-old, with this pseudoaneurysm, and he was literally spiraling down the drain because he was shunting into his pulmonary system from the pseudoaneurysm in his ascending aorta, and he was turned down by one of my colleagues, and they asked me to look at him. And I thought about the 84-year-old guy we treated a couple weeks earlier. And I said, well, we can kind of cover the hole, but we got to make sure we deal with the fistula and the PA. And so we put a device in, plugged the hole a little bit. You can see I got wires across this thing, and it didn't completely seal the shunt, but it slowed it down. 4 days later, the guy was sitting up in bed talking to us where he was dying earlier. He says, "Can I go home?" And I said, "No, you've still got this mess in there." So 4 days later, we took him back and converted open. You can see we pulled all this hardware out of there. Ends up this was quite a mess. You can see a couple of big holes back there. But plugging those holes with those ASD devices allowed us to sort of address this physiologic abnormality. There was fungus on the path specimen. And then 2 years later, after he sort of stopped taking some of his diflucan, he came back again, and we converted him to a homograft. And this guy's still around too, and this guy's now about 14 years out. But the lesson here was that patients can inspire us, and we need to learn lessons from each patient. So I called the wife of the 84-year-old guy and told her the story about this young guy. I called her and told her about how, sorry that we couldn't save her husband, but that what we learned from him saved this young man, whose kids were at his bedside saying goodbye to him when I first met the guy. And, so I think, we can learn from every single situation we have and every patient, and that's where our innovation has to come from. These ascending stent grafts are going to continue. We're going to start a pivotal trial later this year. They're going to be patients with pseudoaneurysms and chronic dissections, a couple of different iterations. And again, I think it's important to know that our inspiration comes from our patients. We can also get some inspiration from industry and regulatory as partners. But we also can learn from students. And one of my proudest sort of achievements have been my Teacher of the Year sort of awards, and this Magoon Award I got from the National Residents Association. He was also a Stikeman professor. And so in the theory, I talked a little bit about basic science. This lab started because I had an early student ask me to do basic science during the year. We were supposed to focus on Over the several years, we put together a bunch of simple sort of basic science stuff by collaborating with the engineering department, and now I have a bioengineering lab and engineering. And we run this matador study where we're learning about the behavior of the aorta. So you can get inspiration from everywhere, and you can definitely not only look at regulatory process, but your students as well. That student is now a breast radiologist, but we still keep in touch. And then I want to share with I know I've gone over, but I want to share just one last story about my original point about how this hierarchy of good, when you make decisions, really is the most important thing you should always think about when you have to make decisions. So I've been really fortunate to do a whole bunch of different kinds of research, outcomes research, basic science, translational research. I don't have any grants from the national government. My research is funded internally, and it predominantly comes from these internal treasury funds. So I have an unrestricted research fund, and I have a named chair. And so I use that philanthropy to pay for all this stuff. The first donation I got, I was a brand new guy, and I was taking care of this patient from California. I didn't know he was a wealthy guy. He was just a patient that needed his mitral valve taken care of. And I did a complex kind of a aortic operation and a complex mitral valve repair. And it was a really difficult repair, but when we were done, the repair worked. Like mitral regurgitation was gone. But I had to downsize his mitral valve. Maybe I should do what we're going to learn about later about augmenting the mitral valve with a patch. I'm looking forward to that talk. But I probably made it a little too small. And before patients get discharged, we get echocardiograms on all of them. It looked fine on the TEE when we left the operating room, but the pre-discharge echo, the gradient was too high. And so I went and talked to this guy, and I told him, I'm really sorry. We were happy that the valve's not leaking anymore, but I think it's going to give you trouble. Like, you're not having problems from mitral stenosis now, but I think in a short period of time, this is going to progress. We're going to be back in the operating room. And I think the best thing to do is just take you to the operating room today. This was 5 days post-op, and replace that valve. I'm so sorry that I failed, and this guy was really cool. He's like, don't worry about it. Like, I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate you kind of having my best interest. And we talked about how I might need a mitral replacement in the first place, because we knew it was going to be a difficult repair. So he did great. He went home. And I didn't think anything about it besides kind of beating myself up about, making the wrong choice the first time around in the OR. And then the guy, I get a notice that the guy donated $1 million. He gave half of it to me and half of it to the electrophysiologist who had sort of managed his AFib a long time before I met the guy. I didn't know what to do with it. And it sat there. And then when they talked about giving more money, of course, he said, well, what have they been doing with that money? And I didn't use it because I didn't want to use that money. I was using other money from the department. So I've since learned how to handle that philanthropy funds. Now I spend a lot of money doing a lot of different research. But that story sticks with me as well, because, that whole process of raising these funds to pay for the research we do came because I feel confident that I made the right decision about that guy, even though I beat myself up about it. He's a very successful man, and he appreciated it. And so I think that, these sort of lessons are key. And I'll end with some notes from my dad. So in the end of my dad's autobiography, he's got this sort of list of these sort of aphorisms that he sort of shared with us. Again, he was a storyteller, and he would always throw these pieces of wisdom in the conversation you have with us. Like, on family, he said, don't ever be afraid to speak your mind. On success, he said, he used to tell us, when you meet a successful person, ask them how they got there, and you'll be surprised how much they'll share their wisdom with you. And he was a businessman, and so he wasn't afraid to take risks. But he said, once you do, and you're committed to that decision, you have to just decide that failure won't happen, and then it's no longer a risk. And again, businessman, he talked about money. He would say, take care of the goose that lays the golden eggs, but look for other sources of growth. Diversify what you're doing with your money and your business. And then when it comes to work, my dad made sure that, whatever you did, and you made sure that you made it fun and that you were enjoying it, and you step back and sort of assess that. And so I thought that some of the principles that he talked about there are relevant to what I talked about today, that we need to make sure communication is open and clear. Look to mentorship and collaboration. It will take you far. be persistent, get that gut quotient that Cosgrove talked about, like trust that and don't give up. Careful innovation is key to your growth and your future. And put yourself in a place where you have good culture, where the people are happy and the morale is good and it's fun, and make it fun. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today.
Eric, thank you. Thank you very, very much. You weren't kidding when you said stories are the best way to educate the group. Well, these stories that you related to us, I think were profoundly educational, inspiring to all of us who had a chance to, a privilege to listen to them.
Thank you.
It felt like we had 10 visiting professors in the room today. I appreciate the references that you made to our former Stikeman professors. Any questions for Dr. Roselli? Reza.
I'm Reza Mehran from Houston. I really enjoyed your talk on wisdom in surgery. So maybe I can ask you two questions on wisdom that pertains to my practice. The first one is, how do you share your outcome with the public, or do you share your outcome with the public?
We do.
How do you do that?
We do. So in the beginning, when we started and it was Toby's idea to share them. Floyd Loop had a different style. He sort of sat in the back, and Toby sort of came to the forefront, and he would publish these booklets, and we would send them to all referring doctors all over. And then we no longer print the booklets because people don't want, there's no newspapers, and paper stuff is gone. We put it online and we put it out there, and we have a marketing team that sort of looks at the audience. So we have focused sort of groups of clinicians that we send things to, lay public, especially as people get older. They love talking about their healthcare problems. There are this thing called Consult QD that we have. There's a heart letter that goes to, again, mostly kind of the older communities. But we share those stories, and we publish those outcomes based on sort of our centers model. So now that we've got this centers group, we might put our aortic valve outcomes together along with maybe a heart failure outcomes or something like that in one edition, and then the subsequent edition will have aorta outcomes and electrophysiologic outcomes or something like that under these umbrellas. So we do share that, and it's readily available to patients who come from all over. They know what our outcomes are.
So you focus on the outcome of the center rather than outcome of individual practitioners.
Individual outcomes, we know them, we get them handed to us on a monthly basis. So in our staff meetings, the numbers are right there about the volume that everybody does. The complications and the measurement of kind of detailed outcomes, they're anonymized by a alphabet letter or something like that, but you kind of know, when they look at the breakdown of the kind of operations, kind of who's who a little bit. But certainly for personal analysis of your own experience, everybody gets their own outcomes delivered to them on a monthly basis. So you can keep track of what you're doing.
Here's my second question. I was very impressed by your algorithm on creating a center of excellence by distributing areas of excellence among different group of individuals. So here's the question. How do you convince a young graduate that you're going to do just that?
Well, we don't. So we don't want anybody to do just that. We want everyone to be broad. We want everybody to sort of, if you get pigeonholed into a niche, you're going to have trouble. That has to be an area of sort of expertise that you develop as not a hobby, but a special interest. So I was telling a bunch of the guys last night when we were out to dinner, what we decided that we do is when we bring a new staff cardiac surgeon on, they don't get any of the STS designated cases as their first cases. They don't get a primary CABG or an isolated valve. We can't afford to have them make a mistake on those. What they get is actually the complex cases. Multi-component endocarditis case or something that comes in through the scheduling office. Now they have a senior guy that's there available either to scrub with them or to kind of help them think through the difficult, critical parts. But that's where they get thrown into the fire right away before they take on some of that stuff, some of that kind of more fast-paced sort of, things. And if someone wants to focus on minimally invasive right thoracotomy aortic valve, well, great. You've just done a whole year of a whole bunch of endocarditis roots. It's going to be an easy thing for you. You're going to know when you have to convert. So we let them sort of become a really expert in a broad way as a young person. The cardiologist, same way, they got to fill up all their clinic slots before they start sort of saying, I'm going to fill them with this or that sort of thing. If you come in like you're going to only do one thing, you're not going to do any of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This was a really great talk and very, very nice to deliver to the very important. We talked about this sort of counterintuitive decision to allow the new staff to do the complex cases, but not to dabble into the simple, the ones that the public is scrutinizing. What is your approach with trainees? For example, you have the same approach. You don't let them do memories, you don't let them do capitals, they go and do the complex cases first.
No, it's the other way around. It's the other way around.
I mean, that's part of the.
Yeah, those technical elements are the operation or the stuff where the trainees, it's we look, those are the cases where I'm on the left side of the table, but I'm there, I'm able to sort of anticipate a problem before a trainee does it. But we don't let a trainee take down an IMA until they really know how to do it well by themselves. We have plenty of people around. We had Turkey Elbacher around with us for a couple of years there, and he trained a whole lot of more junior people how to do something like take down an IMA and cannulate safely or open a redo. And so there's this sort of graduated sort of training process.
Questions or?
Eric, you showed us a lot of how you were mentored through your career, and it's been quite spectacular. Maybe share with us how you mentor the other generation that's behind you. Like, do you have a specific approach or as part of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of it's sort of just day-to-day things. I would say, and probably it's because of the way that I always felt at the Cleveland Clinic that I had many mentors. I try to keep my door open to my office, and sometimes it's like really annoying. I'm just sort of starting to get traction on doing something, and someone pops in and wants to talk, and I just kind of remind myself to look them in the eye, Or sometimes I just will tell a young trainee, listen, I don't have time right now, but find me later. And I think the communication part is key. Let them know if I'm not available now, I can be available later. I make a lot of phone calls on my drive home. That's a nice thing about the hands-free phone car connection these days. I make a lot of those sort of phone calls, and all of the people that graduate have my cell phone number, and I take phone calls at odd times about a case they might be working on. I think just kind of have an open communication, and I consciously sort of think about how I also have to make sure that I'm trying to share with them, because I understand that the way they view me is different than the way I view myself. I understand that I know the pain they're feeling when they have a tough case. Cosgrove and Lytle are always really good about that. Sort of saying, oh yeah, that really stinks. Sometimes they'd be like, that really stinks. Good luck. But I guess just keeping an open line of communication, I think, is one of the most important parts of mentoring folks. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Eric, one more question.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe there are plenty of young surgeons here in the crowd, trainees. You've shown us your evolution in your own career with regards to innovation, all the great products that we're working on. What are you keeping an eye on in cardiac surgery for the next generation?
Yeah, I think, as we're seeing a whole bunch of other forces sort of at play, like in both the US and Canada are these big geographies, but I know that you guys have sort of centralized care here because the population's smaller. But in the US, we're seeing sort of more centralization of cardiovascular care because of the expense of it all and how what we do is more complex and requires a team approach. And so I think as we see new technologies come around, every one of those new technologies creates some new complications that we have to understand. And so, for example, if you're not going to be doing TAVI, and although I was telling you like this morning, I did a whole bunch of them when it was new at the clinic, but I don't do this anymore. We got a whole bunch of cardiologists that can do those. It's good that I know the technology because now I find a whole bunch of them coming back that failed. So, now I'm confident that I'm an expert at reoperations after TAVR. And there's always going to be need for us to be that last resort for patients. So I think we have to keep our eye on is what technology is coming, but also sort of, what we're going to do with it when we see those late complications for it. But also then to step back even a little bit further and look a little longer. I think that we're also gaining a whole bunch of new knowledge about disease etiology. And so certainly I know in the thoracic surgical space, the biology of disease has had a big impact on how it's managed. In the cardiovascular space, I think we're just starting to scratch the surface about that. We're understanding maybe the genetic role of disease progression. And for us, I think it might be a while before we see biologics reverse some of that. But I think that improved biologic understanding is going to change sort of the diagnostic processes and, understanding sort of timing of intervention. So we're going to be intervening sooner. For example, someone's got a TGF beta receptor 2 sort of cause for their aortic disease. I might be replacing that root when it's 4.2 centimeters because I kind of have a better understanding of what that specific patient's pathology is. And it's kind of analogous to maybe what we see in the oncology space, they're doing prophylactic breast surgery. So I think that's where we'll see sort of the biologic understanding will impact sort of our decision making, and we got to be a part of that right from the beginning. We can't count on cardiologists to tell us when to operate, but that's going to be fun. There's a lot of new knowledge.
Great, that's terrific. Well, thank you very
Thanks.
much. I think this segues perfectly into our scientific section. Thank you very much. But at this point, we'll take a short break. We'll reconvene at 9 o'clock for the scientific program. Thank you very much, everybody.